5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Welcome to the Getting Real with Rael podcast, where we get raw, real, and brutally transparent so you can be the best version of you. Make sure you subscribe so you never miss an episode. Now, let's kick it off with your host, Rael Andrews, aka Coach.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, boom. Welcome, champions. Welcome to Getting Real with Rael, where we get raw, real, and brutally transparent so we can help you to be the best version of yourself. I have two amazing guests today on my podcast. I have Dr. Anthony Chaffee, and he is a carnivore expert, 24 plus years. He's got more letters behind his name than anybody. I actually, first time in my life at 62, I have to admit, I have a man crush on Dr. Anthony. So I'm very, very excited. And of course, I have my beautiful queen here, the other half of the Carnivore Power Duo. So Anthony, let's just jump right in. We'll do things a little different. We will get to the cool carnivore things, but part of what my podcast is let's find a little bit about you. So let's go back to when you were 5 years old, because that's a pivotal time in most people's lives. And what was it like growing up, where you come from a big family, an only child, a silver spoon, and bring us forward to now, how we got to there. Kind of let us know a little bit about yourself.
Well, when I was 5, we were living in Southern California. I grew up with my 4 siblings and my 2 parents, and definitely didn't have a silver spoon in my mouth, but came from a very well-educated background. Education and just learning in general was very, very highly regarded in my family going back forever. And so, so things were happy, just a kid in California. And, even at that time, my parents instilled upon us, the importance of proper nutrition, eating properly. I mean, back then it was the Dr. Pritikin 0 fat, super lean meat, skim milk sort of idea. But we always ate meat. We always ate whole foods, but we would have, some carbs, some veggies, and some lean meat, chicken, whatever, steak with the fat cut off, all that sort of stuff. But it was always impressed upon us, even then, that nutrition was very important. Eating the right thing was very important. Eating the wrong thing could lead to disease, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, etc. And so that was something that was instilled in my head as well. And coincidentally enough, that was also about the time that I heard a news program discussing how when eating a Western diet, the Native Americans were 4 times as likely to get all the chronic diseases that we see today, such as obesity, diabetes, heart disease, cancer, autoimmunity, etc. And I remember thinking to myself at the time, well, doesn't that mean the food is causing the disease? I mean, they said it in there, when eating a Western disease. So when they only get it when eating the food. And we eat the food and we get the disease. We just get it at a lower rate. And so what's a non-Western diet? What are they eating that we're not, and vice versa? And no one told me at the time, but they were carnivores. They were eating meat, especially in the Great Plains. They were predominantly eating buffalo until we wiped them out. I mean, we wiped out over 100 million buffalo, almost to extinction, simply to cut off the food supply of the Native American nations. And that was one of the slogans in the 1800s with Buffalo Bill was every buffalo shot is an Indian killed, because that's their food supply, and so that's why they were wiped out. We'll look that up. That's an actual slogan. So that was me at 5 years old, and dinner tables were always interesting. Everyone talking about things that interested them, things that they had learned. Everybody was just interested, and so that started my understanding of the world and my interest in figuring things out.
That's awesome. Now you you've become very big advocate for the carnivore lifestyle. And so how do you deal with the criticism of your peers and, other people that, because we kind of joke on our thing, we have our own carnivore community on Facebook. Community is important because, and full transparency, when a little backup, when we heard about carnivore, a friend of ours in Bali posted this big, beautiful black bull. It had horns, and she said 90-day ancestral reset. And I was like, okay, I'm in. I didn't know what it was, and I just liked the bull. And she said, well, it's going to be, you can either do carnivore or animal based. And I was like, I'd never heard of this, as a fitness expert for 42 years, I never heard of it. So she went to bed. Of course, I go to ChatGPT and I say, okay, what's the carnivore way of eating? And it comes back and it tells me, and I'm like, and I ask it again. I said, well, what about the carbs? What about the where do I get my energy? And he said, no, that's it. And so I initially said, okay, I'm going to do this thing. These guys are a cult. They're crazy. There's no way that this can be right. I set it out to debunk it. And my wife supported it. Here we are, 418 days on carnivore, completely changed our business and all of that. So for you, when you deal with the criticism, how do you deal with that? Focus and what you're doing and stuff like that.
Oh, with facts. I mean, these are just facts. It's not my opinion, and it's not coming down from on high from some cult leader guru. I mean, these are just facts. These are the facts that matter. Humans have been apex predators since before humans have been humans, for over 2 million years. With the advent of the ice ages, and when the ice ages came down, they killed a lot of the plants, killed a lot of animals that relied on the plants, and killed all of the early hominids that relied on plants as well. The ones that survived were Homo habilis, who transitioned to apex predators. They didn't get chased down to the equator where all the fruit and berries were. They actually went. The fossil record is very clear. They went up north into the ice, and the ones that did stay down south and did go down towards the equator, they all died out. And so the ones that survived were Homo habilis, and those were our ancestors. Those are just facts. We've been seeing the Native Americans doing buffalo drops. They have this massive herd. They'll scare part of it off of a cliff. They'll die at the bottom of the cliff, and then they'll use their tools to cut them up, dry the meat, render the fat, mix that up, and make pemmican, which is very fatty. It's 2 grams of fat to 1 gram of protein. So anybody who says that eating a carnivore diet has to be very lean because the natives, because wild animals are lean, that's nonsense. The muscle body is lean. There's no marbling, right? Because that marbling is called myosteatosis. That's a pathological sign of metabolic dysfunction. And we get that from eating grains. We get that from eating grains, and we give that to cows by feeding them grains. Wild animals don't have that intramuscular fat because that's unhealthy, but they have a lot of subcutaneous fat and intra-abdominal fat and fat around the organs. The omentum is an organ in the abdomen. It's entirely made out of fat. And so there's quite a lot of fat, especially in a healthy animal. If it's unhealthy, then it'll be very lean and emaciated, just like people can be. But healthy individuals actually have quite a lot of fat, and they took that fat and rendered it and mixed that with the lean meat ground up, and then we make pemmican. So there's a very high fat diet. Before the megafauna died out, we were eating mammoths. We're eating whales. We're eating seals still today. These were highly prized because of their fat content. And so those are facts. We also have in the fossil record evidence of mammoth drops of our ancestors scaring herds of mammoths over cliffs, possibly with fire, possibly with something else, over 1 million years ago. So again, these are facts. There are also facts that we haven't started eating plants to any great degree, except for in the last 8 to 10,000 years. How do we know that? Well, in the fossil record, and people say, well, we find some pieces of grains in the dental calculi of Neanderthals. Those are only very recent. And also, just because you have a bit of grain in your teeth doesn't mean that's the predominant proportion of their diet. We know from the genetic record that humans have not been able to make amylase, which is the enzyme that breaks down starches from plants and into the constituent glucose molecules. We didn't have that in the genome more than 10,000 years ago or so with the advent of agriculture. So that spread widely at the time. It was a survival trend because a lot of people were eating, these sort of starchy plants and things like that for survival. But that's when that came into the genome. It's very recently, 10, 15,000 years ago. Same with lactase persistence. That was something we cultivated dairy, 10, 15,000 years ago, and then that spread through the genome. But not everybody is able to, has lactase persistence. So this is very recent additions to the genome. So those are facts. We also have this entire field of botany that shows how plants work and how they protect themselves, they're living organisms, and how we have classified, categorized, and named over 1 million different defensive chemicals that plants make. And so that's a fact. We know that most plants on Earth are inedible, meaning that they're so toxic that they will kill you or cause such severe health consequences that it is not safe to eat them even in small amounts. And people say, well, fruits and berries, this is what we're naturally supposed to eat. There's no fruits and berries in the Arctic Circle during the ice ages, which we know that humans were thriving in. That's another fact. It is a fact that people walked from Asia to North America across the Bering Strait on the land bridge, from Russia to Alaska, what is now Russia to Alaska, during a time when 1,500 miles south in the northern parts of North America, in like where it's now Seattle, there was under a mile-high block of ice. So now you're talking 1,500 miles north of that towards the North Pole. This is where they're walking across. We know that happened, and that's how we populated the North and South Americas. So that's a fact. There's no plants available in those regions. It's just, there just aren't. That's a fact. And so even fruit, if you look at the fruits, I had to, I've looked all this up. Anybody can, it's open access to anybody, but there are about 300,000 flowering plants in the world that make, around like 90,000 of them make some sort of fruit or berry. And there are only about 2,000 known edible fruits and berries out there. We really only restrict that to about 150 to 200 fruit that we use, and those are pretty much, those are very genetically modified through hybridization and intensive selective breeding by humans. So those are not the same thing. An orange does not exist in nature, nor does a mango or an avocado. These things are completely man-made. And either way, it's only about 150 of them, 200 of them. So the vast majority, well over 90% of the fruits and berries on this earth are also inedible. They're not safe for humans to eat, and they cause harm. So while a plant wants something to eat that fruit or berry, it does not necessarily want humans to eat that fruit or berry. Often they want a specific animal, typically birds, to do that, like a cassowary bird eats over 150 varieties of fruit and berry in the tropics, and every single one of those will kill you. Every single one will kill every single animal except the cassowary, because if those seeds don't pass through the digestive tract of a cassowary bird, that seed won't germinate and that won't turn into a plant. And so the seed is a plant baby, so they're protecting the next generation. They have to be poisonous to everything except the cassowary bird, and they have to be very beneficial and attractive to the cassowary bird. Those are facts. So it is a fact that plants contain toxins. It is a fact that the vast majority of plants are inedible and will cause serious harm or death, including fruits and berries. It is a fact that the ones that are still considered edible, most of them are considered edible because we either ferment them, soak them, boil them, use chemical processes to treat them to lower the toxic load to an edible point, because we figured out through technology and our brain power that we developed from hunting and figuring out how to take down a woolly mammoth or a blue whale in the ocean with sticks and fire. And that takes a lot of brain power to do that, because we didn't have the physical means to do it by hand. But by treating these things, by treating them with heat or with chemical reactions or with fermentation, we are breaking chemical bonds. We are breaking down different toxins that we are not genetically or biologically capable of breaking down or extracting those nutrients. A lot of those nutrients are not bioavailable, meaning we cannot access them. You can say, oh, there's calcium, there's this, there's that. It's no good to you because you don't have the enzymes to break those things down. We use chemical processes to break down some of them and make them, some of them, more bioavailable, but not all of them necessarily. And we don't necessarily get rid of all the toxins either. So you're getting low-grade exposure to these toxins over time, and that can certainly cause disease. When you look at cyanide, there's about, well, there's a small amount of cyanide in even things like almonds. We well, it's not that much cyanide. Well, how much cyanide do you want? Like, I want zero. I want nothing. But that's a fact. And as little as 40 almonds a day, eaten long term, over the course of months or so, that actually causes very serious thyroid dysfunction and neurological problems.
Wow.
And because it destroys the electron transport chain in your mitochondria, so it can actually damage every cell in your body. But it also blocks out the iodine from reaching your thyroid in the first place, so you can't make thyroid hormone. So it's called a goitrogen, meaning that it causes a goiter, which is a damaged, dysfunctional thyroid. And there's an entire category of plant toxins called goitrogens that cause goiters in people and livestock, etc. Kale is known for that. Kale had to stop being given to livestock because it caused goiters and stillbirths in sheep, and then they gave it to dairy cows, and the milk from the dairy cows gave people goiters. So they said, okay, well, we can't give it. That's messing with our product, with our money. Just give it to people. It'll be fine. It's like, without ever asking if this is safe. So that's another fact. So cyanide, people say, well, 40 almonds a day. Who's going to eat 40 almonds a day? You'd be surprised. I mean, well, that's the thing. Yeah. Even in the ketogenic sort of groups, they use almond flour for like everything instead of carbohydrate flour, because they think that carbohydrate's the main thing to avoid. And I agree, you should avoid carbohydrates. Being in nutritional ketosis is extremely beneficial to our health long term. But other things cause harm too, and that's sort of something that we need to understand. And so, but additionally, I mean, I was being told by doctors in the 90s and early 2000s that we should all be eating 35 to 40 almonds every day to lower our cholesterol, because they have phytosterols, which are the plant's version of cholesterol, which is similar enough to our cholesterol that it signals our liver to make less cholesterol, right? Because we think we're getting it in, because our body perfectly controls the amount of cholesterol, because we need cholesterol. But we want a specific amount. So our body makes the majority of the cholesterol. If we start eating cholesterol, our body will use some of that, but then we'll say, okay, no, now we don't need as much of that. So we'll just start dampening down our own native production, endogenous production. But when you're taking plant sterols, plant cholesterol, our body thinks, okay, great, we're getting this in from our diet. We don't need to work as hard. And you can't use those plant sterols for your hormones or your proper, the proper functions that we use cholesterol for. There's a lot of them. And so that artificially lowers our cholesterol. But I would argue that that's bad, because you want cholesterol. That's a precursor to all your steroid hormones. It's what your brain is made out of. It's what most of your cells are made out of. Well, all of your cell membranes are made out of cholesterol. And so I would argue that's a bad idea. But also, they're telling you to eat the exact amount of almonds that will give you long-term toxicity from low grade.
Kill us.
Well, but that's it. We don't even know. Like, doctors don't even know that there's any cyanide in almonds, or it's probably not that much. Have you checked? Yeah. How are you recommending somebody take in something that contains cyanide if you haven't even checked how much cyanide is in there? And you're recommending the exact amount that is actually going to cause harm and dysfunction from that amount of cyanide, and we don't talk about that. Cassava is very rich in cyanide, to the point that it can kill you with bitter cassava. So they treat that, but that doesn't take out 100% of the cyanide. And then sweet cassava has low enough amounts of cyanide that they consider that fine and safe, and so they don't treat it at all. And so you're knowingly retaining its cyanide proportion, and that's a major staple for 750 million people in the tropics. That's the number one calorie source for 750 million people in the tropics. So that actually does cause harm. In that proportion, where you're talking about nearly 1 billion people relying heavily on cassava, that's a significant amount of cyanide and damage from the harm from that cyanide. And wow. So, again, these are facts. So plants have toxins. We know that they cause harm. We know that we're not designed to eat them, because we don't have the enzymes to break down their toxins. We don't have the enzymes to make their nutrients bioavailable. We have all the enzymes and ability to break down 100% of the nutrients available in meat. We know that we get 100% of the nutrients that we need in the proportion that we need them only from eating fatty meat, because that is what humans have been surviving on since humans have been humans and before. And that is actually what drove us to become humans in the first place, is eating that way. So again, those are facts, and it's not my opinion. These are things that anybody can readily look up The whole idea about not eating meat is very new. I mean, that was never in question throughout all of recorded history. It's all about the importance of eating meat and how that was typically only accessible, in large quantities to the elites, and how they kept meat away from the lower classes and things like that, either due to scarcity in price or just straight restrictions. Those are the king's woods, the king's deer, the king's pheasants, and poachers were killed. They were executed. If you're out there hunting and again getting meat for your family and you were caught, you would be killed, or you could be anywhere or severely punished. And so it was only very recently that they started saying that meat was causing this new upswing in diseases, when we had the processed food industry, the sugars and seed oils and processed foods, and all of a sudden we had heart disease, cancer, and all these other diseases like diabetes increasing dramatically. And they blame that on meat. They blame that on the things that we've been eating for over 2 million years and has never caused disease. They've certainly not caused a new disease. How can an ancient diet cause a new disease? The idea that we just didn't notice any of these diseases is asinine. I mean, anybody who studied any piece of medical history, read a medical textbook from 100 years ago, 150 years ago, which I have because I have them, because I have doctors in my family going back, quite a long way, and they're extremely intelligent, they're extremely observant, and they figured out a lot of things that we're still using and building on today, and so the idea that they would just not notice massive coronaries and they called it a heart attack. The first ever recorded death from heart attack on autopsy was in America in 1912. Never happened before that, right? And he called it a heart attack. He coined the phrase heart attack, because what happens when you get a myocardial infarction, which is what we colloquially term as a heart attack, it's not an arrest. It's not just a heart stopping. That's a cardiac arrest, and that cardiac arrest can happen for a number of reasons, like a myocardial infarction. But a heart attack is a myocardial infarction, which is a blockage of the coronary vessels. And so you block the blood supply to a certain portion of the heart, that part of the heart can die. And so now you've got this big chunk of heart that's dead now, but the heart's moving, it's still pumping, it's still beating, right? And so you have this dead piece of flesh and this moving organ, and all of a sudden it's moving, and it's sort of tearing, and it pops. And so it can burst inside the pericardial sac, fill up with blood, and that compresses the rest of the heart. Now it can't beat, it can't move blood, and you die. So, or it can cause electrical disturbance, and it can cause an arrest from that matter, or that can scar down, and you can survive, and then that can sort of balloon out. That big piece of scar tissue can balloon out and cause an aneurysm. That can rupture as well. Or you'll just see, on an autopsy, a big chunk of scar. Grey's Anatomy existed before 1912, and this is not something that was typically seen. We're saying, oh yeah, look, these hearts just have scars all over them. No, they don't actually. And we knew what atherosclerosis was. That had been described going back quite a ways, but not heart attacks. Okay, so why was it called a heart attack? Because it looked like someone had actually ripped this guy's chest open and ripped his heart open. It looked like someone had attacked his heart inside his chest. And this was actually, I don't know if ridiculed is the right word, but certainly not taken at face value when this person published this in 1912. And it wasn't for another 10 years that people said, oh, okay, actually, no, this guy was onto something, because now we're seeing more and more and more. 15 years later, it's the #1 killer in America. The first one in recorded history is 1912, and then by 1925, it's the #1 killer in America. That obviously is not something you're going to miss, because people have been doing autopsies going back centuries and centuries. I mean, Da Vinci was doing, that's actually why we started doing a lot more autopsies, was because of the artists during the Renaissance. They were given permission by the Catholic Church to do autopsies. That was forbidden before, desecrating people's remains. But the artists were allowed to do this because if you see how the body works and moves together, you can actually make more lifelike and perfect art, which is why when you see the statue of Michelangelo's David, you see his arm, his little pinky's like that, and you see this little, you can sort of see my muscle twitching there, sort of.
Yeah.
That's I'm doing this, right? It's sort of hard to see in the screen, but so he has that muscle flexed, so he has his pinky going like that actually extends, the pinky like that, and he has that muscle flexed. that extends that pinky. So they were such perfect anatomists because they had dissected and looked at so many bodies that he knew if you put that little pinky, that so those muscle bodies on the arm, like those are anatomically perfect.
Wow.
And that's why. And so the doctors were then allowed to do autopsies then as well. So at least since the Renaissance, people were doing thousands and thousands and thousands of autopsies, but possibly even thousands of autopsies during a single career. And so the idea that we just never see a heart attack is it's honestly asinine. And people are in their 20s are having heart attacks now. So people just died earlier then. Well, first of all, no, they didn't. That was average life expectancy from birth because infant mortality rates were high. But when the modal age, meaning that what people actually, how long they lived if they died of old age or just in this normal society as an adult, as far as in the 70s or 80s, the simple fact that in the Constitution of the United States, it says that you can't even run for president until you're 35 years old sort of speaks to that lie, because that's, if everyone's dying at 35, that's a pretty dumb age to say as a minimum for when you can apply for the job of president. The fact of the matter is that all the founding fathers, unless they were killed by something, died in their 80s and 90s. John Adams was 92. Jefferson was 84. Ben Franklin was 64 when the Revolutionary War started, and it wasn't like he was this old decrepit man in a wheelchair. I mean, he was bouncing back and forth from the war to France to garner support from the French against the British and all these other sorts of things. And George Washington was in his mid to late 60s, still working on his farm, and then got pneumonia because he got overly wet and decided to go to dinner instead of changing, because he felt that punctuality was very important, and he getting pneumonia from that. So something had to kill these guys. So it wasn't heart attacks. They're certainly old enough to get heart attacks, and yet no one was seeing any heart attacks, even though they were looking. So during the 20th century, when all of a sudden heart disease and heart attacks became the #1 killer in America, this was when we started seeing the rise in processed food. And the processed food industry, which is very, very successful and very, very wealthy, they paid doctors and researchers and different foundations such as the American Heart Association tens of millions of dollars. They gave the equivalent of $20 million to the American Heart Association in the 1950s to lie and make up a statement saying that Crisco and seed oils were heart healthy. This is where the heart healthy fats come from, and that butter and lard, their direct competitors, were unhealthy for the heart. These were based on no evidence, based on no science, based on no studies. It was just their opinion, and that launched them to national prominence. And they've been selling out to the highest bidder ever since. And there's countless examples since then. I mean, just recently they went out against the people were talking about trying to get sodas off the SNAP program in America, the food stamp program in America. That's the #1 purchased item with food stamps in America. It makes the soda industry, I think it's something like $18 billion a year off food stamps for sodas. And so who comes out in the defense of sodas for SNAP program for kids in inner cities who are poor and need help, right? The American Heart Association, they sent out representatives to argue and say American Heart Association is really against this and blah blah. But it was very clear, definite statement on the record. In I think it was in Arizona that they did this. They met with such a backlash that they had to pull all this back. Oh, I think people misunderstood our position. No, we weren't saying that. It's like, no, you literally said it on the record, and people watched it on television. Like, what the hell are you talking about? So there's all these things. So it's all corrupt. So they excuse me, they lied and paid people to lie and say that meat was causing the problem when it was very clearly junk food. And you remove junk food now, even if you don't go carnivore, your health improves. I mean, there's just no doubt about that. And so they blamed meat for what junk food was doing, for what sugar, seed oils, and processed garbage was doing. And that's the only time they pick cholesterol, say cholesterol causes heart disease, saturated fat increases cholesterol, increases risk of heart disease. And that's how they vilified meat, because meat, especially red meat, has a lot of saturated fat. It's not as much as other things like coconut oil. coconut oil is actually 95% saturated fat. Butter is only 65% saturated fat, and yet in randomized controlled trials, when you give people coconut oil versus butter, cholesterol actually comes down with coconut oil. It goes up with butter. Why is that? Because of those plant sterols. Because it's not saturated fat that's causing an increase in cholesterol. It's the lack of plant cholesterols that are causing an increase. Your body is naturally making more. It's not causing it to increase. Your body is trying to do what it's designed to do. If you just don't eat anything at all for 5 days, your cholesterol will go up. Why? Because your liver wants more cholesterol. That's how much cholesterol your body wants. So if you're not eating a bunch of plant sterols and artificially lowering your cholesterol, or you're not eating a whole bunch of carbohydrates, which kick yourself out of a fat-burning metabolism, so where you're not transporting fat to your liver to make energy, then that will artificially lower your cholesterol. But if you just let your body do what it wants to do, your cholesterol will naturally go up in the exact same way. Saturated fat does not increase cholesterol production. And also saturated fat, we know for a fact, does not cause heart disease, because we've all been eating saturated fat since time immemorial, and it never caused heart disease, and never will. But we also have large-scale randomized controlled trials, meta-analyses of these randomized controlled trials, and now meta-analyses of the meta-analyses of these randomized controlled trials, called an umbrella review. It's the very tippy top of the pyramid of evidence hierarchy. And that was published. It was an umbrella review published in the Journal of the American College of Cardiology, the top cardiology journal in the world, in 2020. And they found that there was absolutely no evidence to support saturated fat increasing risk of cardiovascular disease. In fact, they found no link whatsoever, which means that there's no link, that there's no cause and effect relationship. I mean, these are randomized controlled trials, which you can show a cause and effect relationship, and they're showing no cause and effect relationship. And not only that, but they found a protective, again, this is causative because these are randomized controlled trials. They found a causative protective link between saturated fat consumption and protection from stroke. So they found that increased saturated fat intake reduced risk of stroke, and people that had less saturated fat in their diet actually had more strokes, higher risk of strokes. So that is just nonsense. And then, the only randomized controlled trials replacing animal fats with vegetable oils and lowering cholesterol, every single one of them has showed that this actually increases cardiovascular mortality rate. So more deaths from heart attacks and strokes as you remove animal fats, replace them with vegetables, oil, seed oils, margarine, and lower cholesterol. So this was vilified falsely. This was for, and this is in the literature. Journal of the American Medical Association, one of the top medical journals in the world, published a paper in 2016 that actually published the actual internal memos from the sugar companies detailing how they were paying off professors from Harvard. In this particular set of documents, there was 3 professors from Harvard, and paying them to falsify data and publish fraudulent studies to make it appear as if cholesterol caused heart disease when it was much more likely to be sugar and junk food, and to exonerate sugar and say that it was safe. And one of those professors, head of the USDA, and he was the one who authored and published the 1977 USDA declaration saying that cholesterol was the cause of heart disease based on no experimental data. In fact, the experimental data, which they did, basically those same scientists that were being paid by the sugar companies, such as Ansel Keys, who was from Minnesota, not Harvard.
Mr. Ansel.
Yeah, well, he did something called the Minnesota Coronary Experiment, which was a study with 9,600 people, so almost 10,000 people over a five-year period, and they were institutionalized, so they're in jails or mental health facilities, so they could control every single meal that these people got as far as you could, except for contraband, things like that. And it was a double-blind, randomized controlled placebo trial, right? So no one knew what anyone was getting. It was an omnivorous diet. It was just whatever people were eating at the time. But they replaced animal fats with vegetable oils and butter with margarine. And no one knew what they were getting, right? And so after 5 years, they collate this data, and they find that the people that were given the vegetable oils and the margarine did indeed lower their cholesterol, and more of them were dying of heart attacks and strokes. And so they buried it, right? This was done between 1968 and 1973. It wasn't published until 2014. And that was by Dr. Ramsden from the NIH, who uncovered this study and unburied it and found and was able to contact one of the children of another researcher that was involved in the study, non-Ansel Keys, and he still had the records. Those records for that study were actually still in their father's things, and they were able to. I mean, there was no punch cards. That's how far back these things go, right? And they were able to extract the data and get an independent statistician to look at it, and that's what they found. And there are at least 4 other large-scale randomized controlled trials that have shown the exact same thing, and and yet those get buried and they don't get talked about. And they certainly don't get taught in medical school. In medical school, we're taught about the Framingham study. That's what they harp on. Oh, Framingham study. Framingham study is observational. It's just they looked at people over the course of 20, 30 years and said, hey, let's look for some correlations here. It's not experimental. It's not experimental design. And what I was taught in medical school, and what most people are taught in medical school, nursing school, whatever sort of medical program that they're in, even pharmaceutical reps, they're taught this as well. This is just the gold standard study, even though it's not experimental. That this showed that higher levels of cholesterol, serum cholesterol, were associated with higher rates of death from heart attacks and strokes, cardiovascular mortality rates. That's what we were taught. Except that that's not what the Framingham study showed. And that's been published subsequently within the last 10 years, showing that the actual original source data, as Dr. Ravenscoff has published papers on this, showing that the original source data actually showed that as you reduce total cholesterol, cardiovascular mortality rate goes up. So as your cholesterol goes down, deaths from heart attacks and strokes go up. And that was what they showed in this. And the American Heart Association actually lied and were probably very, being paid for this. Ansel Keys also was part of the American Heart Association for a long time as well. And they lied and they misrepresented that data, and they said that it showed the exact opposite of what it actually showed. They said that it showed that increased cholesterol causes increased correlation with cardiovascular mortality rate, and that's the opposite of what it showed actually. But it's the American Heart Association's version that actually got into the textbook and is taught today. So it is just right.
It's criminal. Yeah,
it is.
I love how you say that they should be held accountable, and I know they should.
Criminally, yeah.
Yeah. Now, honey, I know my wife has a question because I want to be respectful. I know you got patience. So what was you had a question you wanted to ask to the Dr. Chaffee?
I have a bunch, but we'll start with this one.
You're going to get one probably. We got it hard out.
Okay. So I was knee deep in menopause, and everything I knew as a fitness expert was not working. Obviously, hormones were all over the place. As my husband said, we started Carnivore to debunk it. Within 30 days of being on Carnivore, every menopausal symptom I had gone. My body completely. I mean, if I could show you what I looked like a year ago as to what I look like today is just mind-boggling. So I guess my question to you is, what are your thoughts on Carnivore and hormonal issues with women, especially? Because personally, I think every woman should be on Carnivore.
Well, I do too. I mean, this is biologically appropriate. And so, if you're eating to your biological design, your body, including your hormones, should actually work to their biological design. And we actually see this when people do go ketogenic or ketogenic carnivore, but even just ketogenic massively improves their hormonal status. So, I mean, it's very simply, the different things that you eat can absolutely affect negatively your hormones. So insulin, which is an extremely busy and important hormone, affects hundreds of different processes and hormones in your body. We this goes up when you eat carbohydrates, and that does drive energy into cells, but that is the least of what it does. It does so many other things. And so when you elevate your insulin because you need to get these carbs out of your system, because those carbs cause glycation, they cause permanent damage to your body, and they can cause all end organ damage, kidney failure, blindness, amputations, heart disease, or Alzheimer's, things like that. These are all known consequences of hyperglycemia and diabetes. Your body has to keep this down by raising insulin, but then insulin is screwing up the whole rest of your system. Very simply, for women, insulin blocks estrogen production in women. Very simple. And so the leading cause of PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, is just high insulin resistance. People are calling PCOS type 4 diabetes now, because Alzheimer's is type 3 diabetes, and PCOS is called type 4 diabetes because that's insulin resistance of the ovaries. I'm calling cancer type 5 diabetes because similar things, like if you keep your insulin down, you keep your mitochondria healthy. If you have healthy mitochondria, you really can't get cancer. And so I have a whole video on that. But for female hormones, as well as male hormones, you optimize your hormones when going on a ketogenic carnivore diet. And ketogenic is the key there because you need to keep your insulin down low, or else you're going to be blocking your estrogen production. So women make testosterone first, and it's converted into estrogen. Insulin blocks that conversion. So you get too much testosterone, not enough estrogen. That's PCOS. As you sort of get later on, you're sort of screwing up your hormones globally. Now you don't even have enough testosterone. Now you really don't have enough estrogen. You go through early menopause. And I think that's the leading cause of early menopause. And I would say early menopause is even in your 50s, because there are people that do ketogenic diets, carnivore diets, that are not going into menopause until their 60s. And you have native populations who are eating more traditional pre-agricultural diets. They're not actually going into menopause until they're in their 60s quite often. And so I've had many women in their 50s, mid 50s, and some in their late 50s who have actually come out of menopause. And any woman that's starting this and they're just past menopause, maybe in their early to mid 50s, I always tell them, like, hey, look, just so you know, this has happened before. These are some of the mechanisms. Also, when you get rid of plants have these phytoestrogens and phytosterol or phyto hormones and endocrine disruptors that are designed to screw up your hormones so that you can't reproduce and breed and bring more little children over to eat that plant and its children, right? It's chemical warfare, right? And so that will massively screw up your hormones as well. And so I see women, their periods normalizing. Sometimes, there's some rebalancing after 3-4 months. There can be some disruptions in your period, but usually after 4 or 5 months, periods are very smooth and level, and even hormones have all evened out. And so I think it's very beneficial to everybody to do that. I see men doubling or even tripling their testosterone levels. I just had a young man on the other day, and he tripled his testosterone levels. I have a 72-year-old man who is a patient of mine. He tripled his testosterone into the healthy range for a 25-year-old. And I see that again and again and again. So, it's also, for growth hormone. Growth hormone is secreted from your pituitaries, triggers your liver to make insulin-like growth factor, so IGF-1. And this is really important for tissue health, rebuilding and repair. And in a lot of anti-aging clinics, longevity clinics, they prescribe growth hormone as an injection. It's very expensive. It's hundreds and hundreds of dollars a month. And
thousands.
Yeah, right. But the idea is that it keeps your growth hormone levels up, which keeps your tissues healthy and rebuilding if it's in the physiological levels, not in super physiological levels that people might do for bodybuilding. But normal levels for a 25-year-old, you keep your body sort of working and rebuilding and repairing itself healthfully. Insulin blocks the production and action of growth hormone. So even like bodybuilders that are pumping in massive quantities of growth hormone, but they're also carb loading. They're eating 6,000 calories in sugar gels and things like that before, during, and after their workout program. And then they're injecting a whole bunch of growth hormone. I couldn't imagine that half of that was even working. And even when this is prescribed for growth hormone deficiency, the state very, very clear. You take this at night before you go to bed. That's typically when you get your biggest doses of growth hormone naturally. And it's at least 2 hours after you've eaten. You have to do this on an empty stomach 2 hours after you've eaten, because your insulin needs to be low, because insulin will block that growth hormone that you inject. So when I put people on ketogenic carnivore diets, I often see their IGF-1 levels and growth hormone levels normalized. And IGF-1 is sort of a marker of growth hormone. And especially in women, I've seen women in their 40s go from very low levels to normal for a 25-year-old. So people saying, why are you comparing hormones to a 25-year-old? Well, because that's sort of when people are nominally healthy from a hormonal perspective, then sort of the wheels start falling off. But the wheels don't start falling off naturally. That's something that we need to get straight, because hormones don't just drop for no reason. They're dropping because we're poisoning our endocrine system. And so even though it's normal for people's growth hormone and testosterone and estrogen to sort of start going down after 30s and 40s and start plummeting after that. That's not actually normal. Just because it's common does not mean that's actually normal. That's not part of our biological design. And so when you normalize people's diet and you get rid of these endocrine disruptors and you normalize the insulin, people's hormone levels actually are much closer to that 25-year-old ideal, even in their 40s, 50s, and beyond.
Wow. All right. So we're coming up on the hour, and I need to get you out. So we'll end with this question. So you've gone home to be with your Lord and Savior. You've left an amazing legacy. And God says to you, he says, okay, you got 3 minutes. I'm going to let you go back down to the earth, and I'm going to give everybody on the earth your attention. What would you tell them? Why should they do carnivore?
Well, I mean, I think the main thing is, just don't eat things that aren't natural. Don't eat things that aren't designed for you. And we can argue about what humans have been eating historically and prehistorically. I think the evidence is pretty clear on that. But that's a discussion that we can have. One thing that is not up for discussion is that all this processed food is obviously not what we're designed to eat, because it didn't exist when we were being designed. So, the least that you can do is get rid of that garbage and eat whole foods that existed 50,000 years ago during an ice age. It's a pretty good rule of thumb, right?
Yeah.
Because that is what humans were doing, and those are the conditions they were living in prehistorically. So don't look at post-agriculture. Look at what was available for people during that time and in those locations, which is where people predominantly were. And we're extremely healthy. I mean, these people were living in the harshest of environments. It doesn't get harsher than in the North Pole now. And add an ice age on top of that, that's insane. And people were not only surviving, they were thriving. You can't, if you are not thriving during an ice age, you're not surviving. Right. And we did. And we not only thrived, we became the most dominant species that has ever existed on this earth. Wow. And that is largely because of the ice ages, because that forced us to manifest our destiny as not only apex predators, but super predators. That's what humans are termed as, super predators, because we hunt every single animal on the land, sea, and air. Right. And nothing else can do that. We hunt and take out and eat more apex predators than any other apex predator on earth. So we're actually considered super predators, right? And so it's just understanding what we're designed for. And there's quite a lot of information just to say what humans have been eating for a long time. There's a lot of information to show that when we stop eating this way, we get very sick. I mean, the fossil record is very clear. As soon as people started eating plants in this large to this large degree with agriculture, people dropped by 5 inches. Their brain shrank by 11% for men, 17% for women. They started getting crowded teeth, crooked teeth, smaller jaws, cavities, signs of poor wound healing, signs of infectious disease and tuberculosis, and all these other sorts of problems. That happened immediately in the fossil record following agriculture within generations. And we saw that happen again within generations with the Native Americans, the Native Australian Aboriginals, and so on, when they were converted to a Western diet. When we wiped out the buffalo, we saw people within generations shrinking by generation. There's a study called The Tallest in the World, published in 2001, that looked at original source data from the late 1800s, where they measured just thousands of individuals across the Great Plains and European Americans, and they found that the Native Americans alive in the Great Plains were hands down the tallest human beings alive on Earth at the time. And the people like the Cheyenne, the adult male height was average 5'10". Right now it's 5'8" in America, right? So it's still taller than what our average height is here in America. There are other areas, like Denmark and things like that are sort of around that. But they eat a lot of meat, they eat a lot of dairy in Denmark. But the really interesting part of that study was that in that original source data, they explicitly talked about how the older generations of Native American were far and away the tallest. So the young men were actually the shortest. Their fathers were well taller. The grandfathers were even taller than that. And that's because this was just after the bison had been wiped out. So this was in that inflection point when they had been put onto reservations and put on a more Western diet to survive. They're trying to get as much game as they could, but they had to supplement that with more agricultural crops. And that's, you saw that transition happen in real time. And we saw that in the same thing with the Australian Aboriginals, and Weston A. Price documented this in this massive 600-page book going around from different populations as they were converting to Western diets. And he saw them shrinking, their brain shrinking, their jaw shrinking, getting crooked, crowded teeth, and he found they were missing nutrients from animal fats. And as you replace these animal fats, all of a sudden their facial development, jaws and teeth, all of a sudden started developing normally again. And so, we see this in real time. We see this degradation in real time, and many other people have studied this as well. So nutrition is very easy. You just have to see what we've been eating the longest, and what's sort of been the safest, and what happens when we eat another way. It changes very quickly. And so that's what I would just say to people, is just like, look, just eat what you were designed to eat. Obviously, nothing man-made is what you were designed to eat. So start there, and you can work on that.
Amen. Well, we appreciate you, Dr. Chaffee, and I want to respect your time, guys. Thank you so much for watching the podcast. You can follow Dr. Chaffee at Anthony Chaffee, MD, on Instagram and YouTube, and you can follow me and my queen on TikTok and the Carnivore Power Duo, guys. Make sure you like, comment, and share. And maybe our group is growing so fast on TikTok. Maybe when we hit 5,000, we can have you as a special guest in there to come in and talk. I'll reach out to you. But we really appreciate you. You've been a life changer for us. What I love about you, Doctor, is your black and white, and you keep it real, and you stay consistent. And, there's a lot of champions out there that we watch and we follow, but 99% of what I come from is what you got. And I really appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Okay. God bless.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Welcome to the Getting Real with Rael podcast, where we get raw, real, and brutally transparent so you can be the best version of you. Make sure you subscribe so you never miss an episode. Now, let's kick it off with your host, Rael Andrews, aka Coach.